The rain hammered against the wooden platform like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Eliza stood there, shivering in her thin cotton dress, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could somehow disappear into her own embrace. The crowd gathered below looked up at her with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. She was merchandise now, nothing more than an object to be appraised and purchased like a sack of grain or a lame horse. $2, someone shouted from the back. Laughter rippled through the assembly. $2. That was what her life had come to. 23 years of existence, of hopes and dreams and secret wishes, reduced to the price of a loaf of bread and a jar of honey. Eliza had always known she was different. In a world that worshipped slender figures and delicate features, she carried weight that society deemed unacceptable. Her cheeks were full, her waist thick, her body soft in all the places magazines said it shouldn't be. But it wasn't just her appearance that made her unmarketable in this cruel corner of 1890s America. She had no family, no dowry, no skills that anyone valued. The orphanage had kept her until she aged out, and then the streets had claimed her until debt collectors found her. Now she stood on this auction block in a forgotten town on the edge of the frontier, where desperate people came to solve their problems through desperate means. The auctioneer, a thin man with a waxed mustache and dead eyes, gestured toward her with his cane as if she were livestock. "Come now, gentlemen, surely someone can do better than $2 for a healthy young woman. She's strong, she can work, she can cook and clean. She can eat us out of house and home," someone called out, and more laughter followed. Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in her life. These people would not have the satisfaction of seeing her break. The auctioneer's voice droned on, but Eliza had stopped listening. She focused instead on the gray sky above, on the way the clouds moved like ships across an endless ocean. She imagined herself on one of those ships, sailing away to somewhere warm and kind, somewhere people didn't measure worth by the width of your waist or the virginity you'd maintained not by choice but by circumstance. No man had ever wanted her enough to take that from her, and now it was just another item on the list of things that made her undesirable. "Going once for $2, the auctioneer announced, his voice flat with disappointment. This was clearly not the profitable sale he'd hoped for. Then everything changed. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before Moses, and through that gap walked a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. His hair was dark red, like autumn leaves at sunset, pulled back from a face that was all hard angles and weathered strength. He wore the traditional dress of the Scottish Highlands, his kilt moving with each purposeful stride, his leather boots splashing through puddles without hesitation. The whispers started immediately. "That's Duncan MacLeod," someone breathed. "The giant from the Northern Territories." Another voice added, "I heard he killed a bear with his bare hands." A third whispered, "They say he lives alone in the mountains like a savage." Duncan MacLeod climbed the steps to the platform with the ease of a man accustomed to rough terrain. He moved past the auctioneer without acknowledging him, his green eyes fixed entirely on Eliza. Up close, he was even more imposing. His presence filled the space, made the air feel thicker, charged with something Eliza couldn't name. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, really looked at her, not with the dismissive cruelty of the crowd below but with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he spoke, his voice deep and rough with the burr of the Highlands, carrying across the platform and silencing the crowd. "You're coming with me." Eliza didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet felt rooted to the platform, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Duncan MacLeod stood before her like a force of nature, waiting, but there was something in his expression that wasn't impatience. It was certainty, as if her agreement was already a foregone conclusion. "I don't understand," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You haven't even bid." Duncan reached into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a handful of gold coins. He didn't count them, didn't look at them. He simply tossed them at the auctioneer, who fumbled to catch them, his eyes widening as he realized what he held. It was easily 20 times what anyone else had offered, perhaps 50 times. "That enough?" Duncan asked, though it wasn't really a question. The auctioneer nodded frantically, already biting one of the coins to test its authenticity. Duncan turned back to Eliza. "Come on then. Storm's getting worse." He was right. The rain had intensified, and the wind now carried the bite of early winter. But Eliza hesitated. "Where are you taking me? What do you want from me?" Something flickered across Duncan's face, an emotion too quick to catch. "Somewhere better than here," he said. "And nothing you're not willing to give." Then he did something unexpected. He removed his heavy woolen cloak and draped it around her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body heat, and it smelled of pine smoke and mountain air. But we need to leave now. These people don't like strangers, especially ones who disrupt their entertainment. As if to confirm his words, Eliza heard muttering from the crowd below. The men who'd come to buy cheap labor were unhappy about being outbid by an outsider. She saw hands moving to belts where knives hung, saw the narrowing of eyes that promised violence. Duncan saw it too. He took her hand, his grip gentle despite the calluses that spoke of hard work, and led her down the platform steps. The crowd didn't part this time. Instead, they pressed closer, forming a wall of hostile bodies. A man stepped forward, his hand on his knife handle. "That's quite a lot of gold you're carrying, stranger. Maybe you should share with the locals." Duncan's response was swift and decisive. His free hand shot out and grabbed the man by the front of his shirt, lifting him off the ground with an ease that should have been impossible. "Touch me or the lass, and you'll regret the last decision you ever make," he said, his voice calm but carrying a promise of violence that made even the bravest men step back. He dropped the would-be robber, who stumbled away, all aggression deflated. The crowd parted then, and Duncan led Eliza through, his hand never leaving hers. At the edge of town, a massive horse waited, a Highland cob with a coat the color of midnight. Duncan lifted Eliza onto the saddle as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, creating a cage of strength that somehow felt protective rather than confining. They rode north, into territory Eliza had never seen. The settled lands fell away, replaced by wild forests and rolling hills that grew steeper with each mile. Duncan didn't speak, and Eliza found herself too overwhelmed to break the silence. Her mind spun with questions. Who was this man? Why had he paid so much for her? What did he expect in return? Hours passed. The rain eventually stopped, replaced by a cold mist that clung to everything. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they emerged from a forest onto a ridge. Eliza gasped at what she saw. Spread before them was a valley of stunning beauty, with a river cutting through its center like a silver ribbon. And there, nestled against the northern slope, was a cabin. It was larger than she'd expected, built from sturdy logs with smoke rising from a stone chimney. "Home," Duncan said, the single word carrying a depth of feeling that surprised her. As they descended into the valley, Eliza noticed other things. There were outbuildings, a barn, fenced pastures where she could see sheep grazing. This wasn't the primitive dwelling of a savage hermit. This was a working homestead, well-maintained and prosperous. Duncan helped her down from the horse, and Eliza's legs nearly gave out. She'd been riding for hours, and her body wasn't accustomed to it. Duncan steadied her, his hands firm on her waist. "You'll be sore tomorrow," he said. "But it passes." He led her inside, and Eliza found herself in a space that defied her expectations. The cabin was warm, heated by a fire in a large stone fireplace. The furniture was handmade but crafted with obvious skill. There were shelves lined with books, more books than she'd ever seen in one place. The floor was wooden and polished, covered here and there with thick rugs. It was clean, organized, and somehow welcoming. "Sit," Duncan said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "I'll make tea." Eliza sat, watching as this giant of a man moved around his kitchen with surprising grace, setting a kettle to boil, pulling out cups and a tin of tea leaves. When he finally sat across from her, 2 steaming cups between them, she found her voice. "Why did you buy me?" Duncan took a sip of his tea, his green eyes studying her over the rim. "Because no one should be on that platform," he said finally. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control. Because I looked at you and saw someone worth saving." "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." The first week passed in a strange dance of caution and curiosity. Duncan gave Eliza the bedroom, a cozy space with a real mattress and warm quilts, while he took to sleeping in a loft above the main room. He made no demands, asked for nothing except her company at meals. Each morning, he prepared breakfast before heading out to tend his land. Each evening, he returned to find Eliza had cleaned or cooked or organized something, her way of contributing without being asked. They spoke in fragments, careful revelations doled out like precious coins. Eliza learned that Duncan had come to America 5 years ago, fleeing something he wouldn't name in Scotland. He'd built everything here with his own hands, carved this homestead from wilderness through sheer determination and strength. He raised sheep, sold wool, and lived a solitary existence that seemed both peaceful and lonely. Duncan learned that Eliza had grown up in an orphanage run by nuns who believed suffering built character. She'd been taught to read and write, skills rare for someone of her station, because one kind sister had seen potential in her. She loved books, especially stories of far-off places and brave adventures. She'd never been wanted, never been chosen, never been told she had value beyond what labor she could provide. "That's criminal," Duncan said one evening as they sat by the fire, the day's work done. "To treat a child that way." Eliza shrugged, a gesture she'd perfected over years of protecting herself from hope. "It's just the way things are. Pretty girls get adopted. Smart boys get apprenticeships. The rest of us get what's left." Duncan was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I was the seventh son of a seventh son," he said. "In the Highlands, that's supposed to mean something magical. But all it meant for me was that there was nothing left to inherit. My brothers got land, titles, positions. I got sent away to fight in wars I didn't believe in, to kill men I had no quarrel with. I was too big, too strong, too useful as a weapon." He stared into the fire, and Eliza saw pain etched in the lines of his face. "I did things I'm not proud of. Followed orders that haunt me still. One day, I looked around at the blood and the bodies and realized I'd become the monster people already thought I was. So I left. Walked away from everything and everyone I knew. Came here to disappear." "But you didn't disappear," Eliza said softly. "You built something. This place, it's beautiful. It's a home." "It's empty," Duncan corrected. "I built walls and a roof, but I couldn't build away the loneliness." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eliza felt something shift in her chest. "When I saw you on that platform, saw how they looked at you, heard what they said, I saw myself. Someone worthy of dignity being treated as worthless. I couldn't walk away." Eliza felt tears threatening again, but this time they were different. Not tears of humiliation or despair, but something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "What happens now?" she asked. "You paid for me. Legally, I suppose I belong to you." Duncan's expression hardened. "You belong to yourself," he said firmly. "Always have, always will. Those papers the auctioneer gave me? I burned them. You're free to leave whenever you want. I'll take you to the nearest town, give you money to start fresh. And if I don't want to leave?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Duncan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Then you stay as my guest, my friend if you'll have it, until you decide what you want your life to be." Over the following days, something began to grow between them. It started small, in shared glances and comfortable silences. Eliza found herself watching Duncan as he worked, admiring the way his body moved, the strength tempered with surprising gentleness when he handled newborn lambs or repaired delicate hinges. She noticed how he never made her feel small, never commented on her size or eating habits, never looked at her with anything but respect and growing warmth. Duncan, for his part, discovered layers to Eliza he hadn't expected. She was funny, her dry wit emerging once she felt safe enough to let it. She was intelligent, discussing the books from his shelves with insights that challenged his own understanding. She was kind, nursing a wounded bird back to health, feeding the barn cats even though they were supposed to be working animals. And she was strong, not in body but in spirit, carrying scars that would have broken lesser people yet still finding reasons to smile. One afternoon, as Eliza helped Duncan repair a fence, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "That day at the auction, you said you looked at me and saw someone worth saving. But you didn't just see me, did you? You chose me specifically. Why?" Duncan hammered in a nail before answering, and when he did, his voice was barely above a murmur. "Because you didn't cry," he said. "Everyone else on that platform, they begged or wept or tried to make themselves appealing. You just stood there with your chin up, looking at the sky like you were already somewhere else. That takes courage. That takes a kind of strength most people never find." He turned to face her fully. "And because when I looked at you, I didn't see what they saw. I saw someone beautiful." Eliza's breath caught. No one had ever called her beautiful. "Duncan, I'm not." "You are," he interrupted gently but firmly. "Beautiful in ways that matter. In here." He touched his chest, over his heart. "The rest is just flesh and bone. It doesn't define worth." Winter arrived with ferocious intensity, transforming the valley into a landscape of white and ice. Snow fell in sheets, piling high against the cabin walls, turning the world into something both beautiful and dangerous. Duncan and Eliza found themselves confined to the homestead, their world shrinking to the warmth of the cabin and the necessary trips to the barn to care for the animals. The forced proximity changed things between them. There was nowhere to hide, no space to retreat to when emotions became too intense. They existed in each other's constant presence, and with each passing day, the tension grew thicker, more palpable, like the charged air before a lightning strike. Eliza felt it most acutely at night. She would lie in her bed, knowing Duncan was just beyond the door, so close yet impossibly far. She'd never felt desire before, had convinced herself she was incapable of it, that her body was too wrong to inspire such feelings in herself or others. But Duncan had awakened something in her, a hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the way his laugh rumbled through the cabin, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way her skin tingled when his hand accidentally brushed hers. Duncan was fighting his own battle. He'd bought Eliza's freedom but found himself enslaved by his growing feelings for her. He wanted her with an intensity that terrified him. Not just physically, though his body certainly responded to her presence in ways he couldn't control. But deeper than that. He wanted her laughter, her thoughts, her dreams. He wanted to wake up next to her every morning and fall asleep holding her every night. He wanted to give her everything she'd never had, safety, security, love. But he was terrified of pushing too hard, of making her feel obligated. She'd been bought, after all, even if he'd immediately freed her. The power dynamic was inherently unbalanced. How could he be sure any feelings she developed were real and not born from gratitude or dependence? The breaking point came on a night when the storm outside raged with particular fury. Wind howled like tortured spirits, and the cabin creaked and groaned under the assault. Eliza couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump, and she felt foolish for her fear but couldn't shake it. Finally, she left her room and found Duncan sitting by the dying fire, a book in his hands though she suspected he wasn't reading. He looked up when she entered, concern immediate in his expression. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Eliza shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. "The storm. It's silly, I know." "It's not silly," Duncan said, setting his book aside. "These mountain storms can be frightening, especially if you're not used to them. Come, sit with me." She settled into the chair beside him, and they sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Then Duncan spoke, his voice low and hesitant in a way she'd never heard before. "Eliza, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without feeling any pressure or obligation." He turned to face her fully. "I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've been falling since that first moment on the platform. Every day it gets stronger, and I don't know how to stop it. Don't know if I want to." Eliza's heart hammered in her chest, so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Duncan. Let me finish," he said gently. "I know the circumstances of how we met make this complicated. I know you might feel grateful or indebted, and I never want that to be confused with real feeling. So I'm telling you this not because I expect anything in return, but because hiding it is becoming impossible. You deserve honesty." He took a deep breath. "If you don't feel the same, that's all right. Nothing changes. You still have a home here for as long as you want it. If you do feel something but need time to be sure it's real, I can wait. I'm a patient man. And if you want to leave, to go out into the world and experience life without any connection to the man who bought you off an auction block, I'll help you do that too, even though it would break my heart." Eliza stared at him, this giant gentle man who'd saved her life and asked nothing in return, who treated her like she mattered, who looked at her and saw beauty where everyone else saw failure. All her life, she'd been told in 1,000 ways that she was unworthy of love. She'd believed it, internalized it, built her entire identity around being unwanted. But sitting here, seeing the vulnerability in Duncan's eyes, feeling the truth of her own heart, she realized something profound. She got to choose. Maybe for the first time in her life, she had real choice. Not survival, not necessity, but genuine choice born of freedom. "I'm terrified," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I've never been loved. I don't know how to do this. I'm afraid I'll be bad at it, that I'll disappoint you, that one day you'll wake up and wonder what you were thinking." Duncan reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand. "Love isn't something you're good or bad at," he said. "It's just something you do, every day, in 1,000 small ways. And as for disappointing me, Eliza, that's impossible. You've already exceeded every expectation I didn't even know I had." "I've never been with anyone," Eliza blurted out, then felt her cheeks burn. "I mean, I've never, physically." "I know," Duncan said gently. "And there's no rush. That part comes when and if you're ready, and not a moment before." Eliza felt something break open inside her, walls she'd built crumbling to dust. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been for weeks, but I was too scared to admit it, even to myself." The smile that spread across Duncan's face was like sunrise after an endless night. "Yeah? Yeah," she confirmed, and found herself smiling too, giddy and terrified and more alive than she'd ever felt. Duncan stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "May I hold you?" he asked, and she nodded, stepping into his embrace. His arms came around her, strong and warm and safe, and Eliza pressed her face against his chest, hearing the steady thunder of his heartbeat. They stood like that for a long time, swaying slightly, while outside the storm raged and inside something infinitely precious began to bloom. Spring arrived like a promise kept, transforming the valley into an explosion of color and life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, the river ran high with snowmelt, and the air carried the scent of new growth and possibility. Eliza stood on the porch of the cabin, watching Duncan work with the sheep in the distance, and marveled at how much had changed since that terrible day on the auction block. The physical relationship had developed slowly, carefully, with Duncan's patience and gentleness leading the way. He'd courted her properly, even though they lived under the same roof, treating each step forward as something precious. Their first kiss had happened during a walk through the spring meadow, sweet and tentative and perfect. The progression from there had been natural, guided by mutual desire and deep trust. When they finally came together fully, Duncan had made it beautiful, taking his time, ensuring her pleasure came before his own, treating her body with a reverence that had brought tears to her eyes. He'd shown her that intimacy wasn't something to fear but something to celebrate, a physical expression of emotional connection. Now, months later, Eliza couldn't imagine her life without him. She'd found not just love but purpose. She'd started a small garden, growing vegetables and herbs. She'd taken over the household accounts, her mathematical mind perfect for tracking expenses and income. She'd begun writing, stories that poured from her imagination onto paper, and Duncan had encouraged every word. But there was still one shadow that hung over their happiness. They weren't married. Not because Duncan hadn't asked. He'd proposed formally one evening, going down on one knee despite his size making it comically awkward, offering her a ring he'd crafted himself from silver. Eliza had said yes without hesitation. But actually making it legal was complicated. The nearest town with a church was 3 days' ride, and it was the same town where the auction had taken place. Eliza dreaded returning, feared facing the people who jeered at her, the auctioneer who'd sold her like livestock. Duncan had suggested traveling to a different town, even a different territory, but Eliza had surprised herself by refusing. "No," she'd said. "I want to go back there. I want them to see that I'm not what they thought I was. That I'm happy, that I'm loved, that their cruelty didn't destroy me." So they prepared for the journey, Duncan with his usual quiet efficiency and Eliza with a determination that grew stronger each day. The morning they set out, Eliza wore a new dress Duncan had bought from a traveling merchant, deep green fabric that brought out her eyes. She'd gained weight over the winter, her body soft and nourished from regular meals and lack of stress, but instead of shame, she felt comfortable in her own skin for the first time in her life. The journey south was pleasant, the weather cooperating, the landscape beautiful. They camped under the stars, Duncan teaching Eliza to read the constellations, telling her stories of Highland legends and Scottish heroes. At night, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms, Eliza felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible. When they finally rode into the town, Eliza felt her anxiety spike, but Duncan's steady presence beside her kept her grounded. The main street was bustling with activity, and as they made their way toward the church, Eliza noticed people stopping to stare. She recognized some of them from the auction, saw recognition dawn in their eyes, followed by shock. They dismounted in front of the church, and as Duncan helped Eliza down, the auctioneer himself emerged from the general store. He'd aged in the months since Eliza had last seen him, his mustache grayer, his frame thinner. He stopped dead when he saw them, his mouth falling open. "You," he said, pointing at Eliza. "You're the girl from the auction." "Woman," Duncan corrected, his voice carrying clear warning. "She's a woman, not a girl, and you'll address her with respect." The auctioneer's eyes darted between them, clearly reassessing. Eliza stood straighter, letting him look, refusing to cower. "We're here to be married," she said, her voice steady. "At the church." A crowd had gathered now, drawn by the spectacle. Eliza heard whispers, saw pointing fingers. Then a woman pushed through the crowd, elderly and bent with age but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Margaret Flynn, she introduced herself to Eliza, ignoring everyone else. "I run the boarding house. I was at that auction, watched the whole sorry business. Disgusted me then, disgusts me now. She looked Eliza up and down, not with the cruel assessment of the auction but with genuine interest. You look healthy. Happy. This man treating you right. Better than right, Eliza said, and reached for Duncan's hand. He saved my life, then gave me a reason to live it. Margaret nodded sharply. Good. About time something decent came out of this town. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising with surprising strength. You should all be ashamed. Every one of you who came to that auction, who laughed and jeered, who treated a human being like property. This woman and this man have more dignity in their little fingers than the lot of you combined. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few people had the grace to look ashamed. The auctioneer opened his mouth as if to protest, then seemed to think better of it and slunk away. The pastor, drawn by the commotion, emerged from the church. He was young, newer to the town than many, and listened as Margaret explained the situation. His face grew troubled as he understood the history, but when he looked at Duncan and Eliza, his expression softened. Love is rare enough in this world, he said. If you found it, I'd be honored to bless your union. The ceremony was simple, held inside the small church with Margaret and a few curious townspeople as witnesses. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, there was only silence. Duncan's vows were straightforward and heartfelt, promising to cherish and protect Eliza for all his days. Eliza's voice shook but never faltered as she promised to stand beside Duncan through whatever life brought them. When the pastor declared them husband and wife, Duncan kissed Eliza with a tenderness that made even the hardest hearts in the room soften. As they walked back down the aisle, Eliza realized she was crying, but these were tears of joy, of triumph, of overwhelming gratitude for the strange and winding path that had led her here. That evening, as they prepared to camp one last time before heading home, Duncan built a fire while Eliza laid out their bedrolls. The stars were emerging, brilliant against the darkening sky. Duncan pulled Eliza close, and she rested her head against his shoulder. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Coming to that auction, taking a chance on me? Duncan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I regret that you had to be there in the first place. I regret that the world is cruel enough to put people on auction blocks. But taking a chance on you? Eliza, that was the best decision I ever made. You didn't just become my wife today. You became my home. Eliza tilted her face up to kiss him, pouring everything she felt into that connection. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled. Then let's go home, she said. Back to our valley, our cabin, our life. Let's go home. As they settled in for the night, wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. From worthlessness to worth, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love. She'd been sold for $2 to a crowd that saw nothing valuable in her, but a Highland giant had seen everything. He'd given her freedom, then she'd freely chosen him in return. And as sleep claimed her, safe and warm and loved, Eliza understood that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the darkness before an unexpected dawn. Sometimes being broken open is what allows the light to finally get in. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, better one. She was home. Finally, completely, wholly home.